I was 56 when my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "You don't belong here anymore." The cup of tea in my hand trembled. The saucer did not. My son stood behind her, silent, a portrait hung slightly crooked. Easy to fix if someone cared to straighten it. That's the thing about families. They tilt slowly, quietly, and no one notices until the whole frame is off balance. I looked at her, this young woman who had walked into my home only a few years ago, and I wondered, how dare she? This was my house, the porch I built with Henry's hands and my own, the garden I planted when the children were small, the kitchen where I cooked meals that carried us through winters when money was tight but love was plentiful. And yet, in that moment, I was no longer the mother, no longer the owner, no longer even the woman who had given everything. I was just an obstacle. I remember the sunlight slanting across the porch that day. The wood beneath my feet felt colder than it ever had. This was the same porch where Henry and I had rocked in the evenings, watching fireflies spark against the velvet night. The same porch where my son had once sat at my feet, tying his little shoes before school. And now he stood behind his wife, silent, as though my presence here was nothing but an inconvenience. "Maybe," she said, with that sharp little smile of hers, "it's time you thought about assisted living. A woman your age shouldn't be rattling around a big place like this. Assisted living." She said it so sweetly, like it was a gift, but her eyes gave her away. There was hunger in them, a hunger for the walls, the deeds, the money tied to this land. I set my cup down, careful not to spill a drop. Because if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's this. You never let them see your hand shake. Not when you're signing papers, not when you're holding your ground, and especially not when they're trying to erase you. My son finally spoke. "Mom, maybe it would be easier for everyone." Easier. That word stung worse than the slap I wished he had given me instead. Easier for whom? For the wife who wanted to rule this house? For the son too weak to defend his own mother? I smiled. It wasn't the smile of surrender, though they thought it was. It was the smile of a woman who has seen storms pass, who knows the foundation she built with her own hands will outlast the rain. Because what they didn't know was that this porch, this house, this life, all of it still carried my name. And I wasn't done yet. That day I was erased, but what they forgot is I had the power to erase her first. After that day on the porch, their whispers began. At first, I pretended not to hear. I told myself, they're young. They'll learn respect in time. But respect, once gone, rarely returns. I would be in the kitchen, washing dishes with the window open, and their voices would carry up from the driveway. Her voice, sharp and certain. My son's voice, softer, hesitant. The way a man sounds when he knows he's doing wrong, but doesn't have the strength to stop. "Why does she still stay here?" She hissed once, thinking I couldn't hear. "She's just taking up space. She doesn't work. She doesn't pay. This isn't her house anymore. It's ours now." Ours? That one word cut deeper than any knife. Because I remembered when ours meant me and Henry, scraping pennies together, hammering nails into beams, building a life out of nothing but willpower and love. And now, in her mouth, ours meant my erasure. I leaned against the counter, my hands wet with soapy water, listening. Every word she spoke was another nail in the coffin she was trying to build around me. "She's not even useful," she went on. "Other mothers babysit, clean, contribute. Yours just sits there. Just sits there." That's what I was reduced to, a burden in the eyes of a girl who had never once scrubbed the floors of this house, who had never missed a meal so her child could eat. And my son, my sweet boy, a child I once held against my chest when he had nightmares. What did he say? Nothing. Silence. Always silence. He didn't defend me. He didn't say, "This is her home too." He just let her words slither into the cracks of our family, splitting us apart piece by piece. It wasn't just once either. I heard them at night, their laughter muffled behind the bedroom door. I heard them in the living room, when she spoke about me like I was already gone. "She won't last much longer," she said once. "She looks tired, worn out. One day she'll just fade away." Fade away. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, and I promised myself, quietly, that I would not fade. Not for her, not for anyone. If they thought I was invisible, if they thought their whispers would shrink me smaller and smaller, they were wrong. Because every word I overheard did not weaken me. It armed me. It sharpened me. I began to see them for what they truly were: a woman hungry for power, and a son too blind to see he was being used. And me? I was no longer just their victim. I was their witness, and soon I would become their reckoning. They whispered behind my back, thinking I was deaf. But they forgot. Walls have ears, and so do mothers. It was after dinner, on a Tuesday evening I'll never forget. I was clearing plates, stacking them carefully so they wouldn't chip. That's when she spoke. Not in a whisper this time, but boldly, like she had rehearsed every word. "You know," she began, her fork clinking against her plate as she set it down, "a woman your age shouldn't really be living alone in a house like this. It's not safe." I paused, the plate heavy in my hands. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but I knew poison when I tasted it. Before I could reply, she leaned forward, her tone sharpening. "In fact," she said, "I've been looking into some places nearby. Assisted living communities. Nice ones. You'd have company, nurses, activities to keep you busy. It would be easier for everyone." Easier. There was that word again. Always easier. I placed the plate down slowly. "Easier for who?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding. She didn't even hesitate. "For us," she said, her hand sliding across the table to grasp my son's. "For the family. This house is too much for you to manage. We'd take good care of it. You wouldn't have to worry anymore." I turned to my son. His head was bowed, eyes fixed on the table, as if the wood grain suddenly fascinated him. He wouldn't meet my gaze. "Michael," I said softly. That was his name. My boy. The name I whispered over fevers. The name I shouted at soccer games. "Do you believe this? Do you really think I don't belong here?" He shifted uncomfortably, cleared his throat. "Mom, it's not like that," he muttered. "It's just, maybe it's time. You've worked hard your whole life. Why not rest a little? Why not let us handle things?" Handle things. Another phrase that meant nothing and everything. I leaned back in my chair, studying the two of them, her hand gripping his tighter now, her smile widening, like she had already won. "Assisted living," I repeated slowly. "You want me out of my own home, the home I built with my husband, so you can, what? Redecorate? Move your friends in? Sell it off when I'm gone?" She tilted her head, her voice dripping with mock innocence. "Oh, don't make it sound so dramatic. We just want what's best for you. Don't you want to spend your last years comfortable?" Comfortable. As if comfort came from fluorescent lights and strangers in uniforms. As if comfort could be bought by pushing a mother out of her nest. I stood then, slowly, deliberately. The chair scraped against the floor, the sound louder than thunder in the quiet kitchen. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just looked at both of them and said, "One day you'll regret speaking to me this way. And when that day comes, you'll remember this conversation." Her smirk faltered for just a second. But she recovered quickly, laughing softly, as if I were nothing more than a stubborn old woman clinging to dust and memories. She thought she had already erased me. But what she didn't know was that I was already planning my revenge. They told me I'd be better off in assisted living. But soon, they would learn what it meant to live under my roof. It was a Saturday afternoon when they brought out the papers. We were sitting at the dining table, the same one where I had served countless family dinners, the same table where Michael once did his homework, scratching his pencil so hard the wood still carries the marks. My daughter-in-law slid a folder across the table toward me, her smile too wide, too practiced. "Don't worry, it's nothing serious," she said lightly, as though she were offering me a recipe, not a contract. "Just some tax forms. It'll make things easier for everyone in the long run." That phrase again, easier for everyone. I looked down at the papers, dense paragraphs of words in small print, legal language that twisted and turned like snakes. My hands hovered over the folder, but I didn't touch it. "What exactly is this?" I asked. My voice was calm, but I already felt the weight of the trap being set. Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, it's just a quitclaim deed. Basically, it transfers the property into our names so we can manage things more smoothly. For taxes, you know? It doesn't really change anything." Didn't change anything. Those were the words he chose. But in my bones, I felt the shift already. I stared at him, my son, the child I had nursed, the boy who once promised he'd take care of me when I grew old. Now, his eyes darted away, unable to hold mine. His wife leaned forward, her voice soothing, like a snake charmer playing her flute. "It's really for your benefit," she insisted. "You won't have to deal with bills, repairs, all the little things. We'll handle everything for you. All you need to do is sign here." She tapped the line at the bottom of the page. Tap, 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 like a drumbeat urging me to surrender. For a moment, I almost did. I was tired. Tired of the tension, tired of the whispers, tired of fighting shadows in my heart. But then I remembered Henry's voice, clear as day, saying to me years ago, "Never sign anything you don't understand. Paper lasts longer than promises." I folded my hands in my lap and asked, "Have you read every word of this yourself?" She laughed. "Of course, it's standard. Everybody does it." But the way she avoided my eyes told me the truth. Michael reached across the table, placing his hand gently over mine. "Mom, please, trust me. This is just a formality. We'd never do anything to hurt you." I looked at him, my son caught between love and betrayal, and I realized he believed his own words. Or at least, he wanted to. Slowly, with a heaviness in my chest, I picked up the pen. The weight of it burned in my hand, and with one shaky line, I signed away what I thought was just a formality. But in truth, I had just given them the key to erase me. What I didn't know then was that my signature had just written me out of my own home. It began with small changes. A lamp moved out of my room. My favorite armchair pushed against the wall, temporarily. The photographs I had hung for decades taken down and replaced with hers, smiling faces that never included me. Then one evening, she said it plainly. "You know, Mom," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "You'd probably be more comfortable downstairs. The stairs are getting harder for you, aren't they? It's safer in the basement. No chance of falling." Michael stood beside her, nodding silently. Always nodding, never speaking. I stared at them, wondering if they even heard themselves. The basement, the place where we used to store old paint cans and Christmas decorations. The place where the walls sweated in summer and the floor turned cold in winter. "That's not a bedroom," I said, my voice sharp. "It's storage." She smiled that practiced smile. "We'll fix it up for you. It'll be cozy, I promise. You'll have privacy. Isn't that what you want?" Privacy. That was her word for exile. Michael finally spoke, his tone gentle, almost apologetic. "Mom, it's just until we figure things out. You'll still have everything you need down there. We'll set up a TV. Maybe bring in your dresser. It'll be fine." Fine, another word that meant nothing. I wanted to scream, to remind him that I was his mother, that I had raised him in this house, that I had carried him on these very stairs when he was too tired to climb. but the words stuck in my throat. And so, like old furniture being moved out of sight, I was guided down the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, the light dimmer, the walls closer. They placed a bed against one wall, a thin mattress that sagged in the middle. My dresser barely fit in the corner, and when I looked around, I realized there were no windows, no view of the garden I had planted, no sunlight streaming through curtains I had sewn myself, only concrete and silence. That night, I lay awake, listening to footsteps above me. Their laughter drifted down through the ceiling, a reminder that life was going on without me, that I had been erased from the center of my own home and pushed into the shadows. I stared at the cracked ceiling, the pipes humming overhead, and I thought, so this is what it feels like, to be buried alive while still breathing. But even in that darkness, I made a promise to myself. They could push me down here, treat me like clutter, strip the walls of my memories, but they could not take away the one thing I still carried inside me: the truth. And one day, the truth would rise from this basement and burn brighter than the sun they had stolen from me. They thought they had buried me, but they forgot. Seeds grow best in the dark. In the basement, silence became my companion. Days bled into nights, nights into days. The walls kept secrets well, but so did I. Every morning I heard her footsteps upstairs, sharp heels clicking against the hardwood floors I had once polished with my own hands. Every clang of a cupboard, every slam of a door. It was all a reminder. This was her house now, or so she believed. She thought I was defeated. She thought I was too old, too tired, too broken to fight back. And maybe I let her believe that, because silence is a mask and sometimes the strongest weapon a person can wield. At dinner, they barely noticed me. I sat at the end of the table, a ghost in my own family. The conversation swirled around me, but no one asked for my thoughts. No one asked if I needed anything. When I spoke, she would cut across me with her voice sharp as glass. Oh, that's not how it's done anymore. Times have changed. Or worse, she'd laugh softly, tilting her head as thog. In the basement, silence became my companion. Days bled into nights, nights into days. The walls kept secrets well, but so did I. Every morning I heard her footsteps upstairs, sharp heels clicking against the hardwood floors I had once polished with my own hands. Every clang of a cupboard, every slam of a door, it was all a reminder. This was her house now, or so she believed. She thought I was defeated. She thought I was too old, too tired, too broken to fight back. And maybe I let her believe that, because silence is a mask and sometimes the strongest weapon a person can wield. At dinner, they barely noticed me. I sat at the end of the table, a ghost in my own family. The conversation swirled around me, but no one asked for my thoughts. No one asked if I needed anything. When I spoke, she would cut across me with her voice sharp as glass. Oh, that's not how it's done anymore. Times have changed. Or, worse, she'd laugh softly, tilting her head as though I were a child rambling nonsense. And Michael, my son, my boy, he would lower his eyes, sip his drink, and say nothing. Cowardice looks a lot like silence too. But while they dismissed me, I listened. While they forgot me, I remembered. While they underestimated me, I planned. From my basement room, I learned the rhythm of their lives. When she left the house, when he returned from work, which bills she hid in the drawer by the kitchen, which letters she tore up before Michael could see. I kept my silence, but inside me, the noise grew louder each day, a roar waiting to break free. One evening, as I folded my blanket in that cold little room, I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror, leaning against the wall. The face staring back at me was older, lined with exhaustion, but the eyes, oh, the eyes, still burned. Not yet, I whispered to myself. Not yet, but soon. And upstairs I heard her laughter again, bright, careless, triumphant. It floated down through the vents like a song of victory. She thought the silence meant she had won, but in truth, it was the silence of a storm gathering its strength. They mistook my silence for weakness, but silence was just the sound of my revenge taking root. A spark came from something small. It always does. I was in the kitchen one morning, pretending to read the newspaper, pretending not to notice how she hovered near the mail stack like a guard dog. She thought I wasn't paying attention, but mothers see everything, even when we're told we're invisible. She tucked a letter under her arm quickly, as though it burned her fingers. And then, with that sweet smile she wore like a mask, she turned to Michael. "Nothing important today," she said, her voice smooth as honey. And my son, my foolish, trusting son, nodded and kissed her cheek. No questions asked. But the thing about masks, they slip. When she left the room, the corner of that letter peeked out from under the fruit bowl. My hands trembled as I slid it free, but my eyes were steady. It was a notice from the bank, a late payment, on my house, the house Henry and I built, the house she now called hers. My pulse hammered in my ears, but not from fear, from clarity. For months I had lived in their silence, in their shadows, letting their cruelty weigh on me like stones. But in that moment, as I read the words, foreclosure warning, the weight lifted, because I saw the truth. She wasn't just cruel. She was reckless. She was careless. And she was leading my son straight into ruin. I folded the letter, slipped it back exactly where I found it, and smiled for the first time in weeks. At dinner that night, I watched her pour wine into Michael's glass, watched her laugh at some shallow story, watched her fingers flash with rings she hadn't earned. She looked untouchable. She thought she was untouchable. But now I knew her weakness, debt, greed, secrets she thought were safe. And I, the old silent woman in the basement, I held the power to unravel her. Later, when I lay down in that cold room, I didn't feel the walls pressing in anymore. Instead, I felt the world opening. For the first time, the future wasn't just survival, it was possibility. I whispered into the dark soft enough that only I could hear. They think they've erased me, but they've only given me the pen. And from that night on, every smile I gave was a mask. Every silence was strategy. Every step was a thread, weaving the revenge I would deliver. That letter wasn't just a warning from the bank. It was an invitation. And I intended to RSVP. Revenge doesn't begin with fireworks. It begins with whispers, with patience, with one small string pulled at just the right moment. And by then, I had a whole handful of strings. I began with Michael, my son, my boy, still a man who wanted to believe his mother's voice had weight, even if he pretended otherwise in her presence. One afternoon, I caught him alone in the garage. He was tinkering with tools, pretending to fix a lawnmower that hadn't run in years. That's when I leaned against the doorframe and said, softly, almost as if it were casual, "Your father, he would have hated debt." Michael froze, his hands stilled, his eyes flickered, just for a second, as though he had been carrying a secret weight he didn't want me to see. He didn't answer, not directly, but I didn't need him to. The silence between us was enough. I had tugged the first string. Next, I moved on to the neighbors. This house, my house, had always been the heart of the block. Barbecues, Christmas lights, 4th of July gatherings. I had hosted them all, and people remembered. So when I began to sit on the porch again, offering small smiles, mentioning in hushed tones that things weren't quite right inside, the whispers began to spread. She's not happy. They're not treating her well. Something's wrong in that marriage. And rumors, once released, have a life of their own. Then came the finances. I paid close attention. Receipts left crumpled in the trash. Phone calls she made behind closed doors. Every careless move was another thread for me to weave into my tapestry. I learned where the money was going, what she was hiding, how she was quietly drowning them both in her greed. And while she believed I was nothing more than an old woman folding laundry in the basement, I was already pulling her strings tighter, knot by knot. She began to notice, of course. One evening she caught me looking too long at the bills on the counter. Her smile was sharp, her voice sharper still. "Don't worry about things you don't understand," she snapped. "Just enjoy the time you have left." The time I had left. She meant it as a dismissal, but to me it sounded like a challenge. I smiled, and I tucked away another string, because the truth was simple. The house may have looked like hers. The family may have felt like hers. But step by step, thread by thread, I was taking it all back, and she never even noticed, until it was far too late. They thought they were the puppeteers, but I was the one holding the strings. Kindness is the easiest disguise in the world. People rarely suspect it. They see a smile, a gentle word, and they believe the battle is over. They believe you've surrendered. And that was exactly what I wanted her to believe. I began small. Fresh flowers in the kitchen vase, arranged just so, with a little note tucked inside, for family harmony. She smirked when she saw them, as though my efforts were pathetic, but she didn't throw them away. Then I cooked. Not every night, just often enough. Her favorite pasta, her preferred wine. I poured her glass before she asked. I made sure the table gleamed with polish, the napkins folded like we were dining at a fine restaurant. And she ate. She smiled. She even complimented the sauce once, though her pride made her swallow the words quickly. Michael noticed, too. He looked at me differently, his shoulders loosening when he walked into a home that finally felt calm again. The storm clouds, he thought, had passed, but storms don't pass. They only gather strength in silence. With every act of kindness, I lulled her deeper into her own arrogance. She began to leave papers lying out again, trusting that I was too busy kneading dough to care about overdue balances. She began to gossip on the phone within earshot, believing my silence meant ignorance. And every word, every scrap of evidence I collected quietly, like pearls on a string. One night, as we cleared the table, I even touched her arm lightly and said, "You know, dear, I'm so grateful you take care of things now. I don't know what we'd do without you." Her eyes glittered. Oh, she believed me. She wanted to believe me. She leaned closer and whispered, "Well, someone has to handle the real responsibilities." I smiled. I didn't argue. I let her have her little victory. Because victories make people careless, and the careless always fall hardest. The neighbors began to comment, "How wonderful it is to see you all getting along again." Even Michael said one evening, "You've been so kind lately, Mom. It means a lot." I only nodded, but inside I laughed. Kindness had become my weapon, a weapon sharper than any blade, stronger than any shout. Because she never saw it coming. She thought I was softening, fading, accepting my erasure. But really, I was baiting the trap. And she, so proud, so blind, was already stepping inside. They say kindness kills, but in my hands, kindness was the perfect noose. Every lie leaves a trace. Every mask splits eventually. And if you're patient enough, if you watch in silence long enough, you can gather the whole picture, piece by piece. That's what I did. I became a collector of her lies. It started with the bills. One slipped phone call about another payment due. One crumpled receipt for jewelry tucked into the trash. One statement from a department store. Charges Michael never made. I began to keep a small notebook, hidden under the loose floorboard in my basement room. Dates, amounts, names. Every detail written in careful, steady handwriting. The same hands that once sewed his Halloween costumes, that once balanced Henry's wages against grocery lists, now wrote a new kind of story. A story of theft, a story of greed, a story she never thought anyone would see. But the ledger grew heavier with each passing week. And came the moment that sealed her fate. She left her purse on the kitchen counter one afternoon, too busy taking a call in the garden. The clasp was already half open, and there, nestled between lipstick and car keys, was a bank statement addressed in Michael's name. I didn't steal it. I didn't need to. The envelope had already been torn. The paper slid out easily, and the numbers on the page were enough to make my heart lurch. Thousands, tens of thousands, drained. Credit cards maxed. Loans taken in Michael's name. All hidden under the illusion of managing the household. I placed it back exactly as I found it. When she returned, laughing into her phone, she didn't notice the way my eyes followed her. She didn't notice the silence had shifted. It was no longer heavy with defeat, but sharp with intention. From that day forward, I doubled my notes. I wrote down names of creditors. I memorized dates. I copied account numbers onto slips of paper, hidden away like treasures. Every entry in my secret ledger was a nail in her coffin, and the more I wrote, the calmer I became, because knowledge is power, and I had more of it than she could ever imagine. One evening, as she preened in the mirror before going out, I passed her in the hall. She caught my eye and smirked. "You really should get out more," she said. "Life a passing you by." I smiled politely, but in my mind I thought, "No, dear, life isn't passing me by. It's circling you, and I'm holding the rope." She built her empire on lies, and I had the ledger to prove it. Every good performance begins with a smile, and I had been practicing mine for months. She thought she was the lead actress in this house, the center of every scene. But she didn't know I had already written the ending. It started at Sunday dinner. Michael sat at the head of the table, she beside him, her fingers heavy with gold I knew they couldn't afford. Neighbors had joined us that evening, old friends from the block, the kind who notice small things, the kind who talk. Between bites of roast chicken, I leaned in just enough for my voice to carry. "Michael," I said softly, "did the bank ever call you back about those missed payments? I keep meaning to ask." The room stilled. Forks paused halfway to mouths, and for the first time I saw her eyes widen. She laughed quickly, too quickly. "Oh, it's nothing, really," she said, waving her hand like she could swat the truth away. "Just a silly mix-up." But the neighbors exchanged glances, and Michael's brow furrowed. That was Act 1. Act 2 came a few days later, at the grocery store. I bumped into a friend I hadn't seen in years. We chatted near the produce aisle, and I let my voice drop low, just enough for curious ears to perk up. "It's been hard lately," I murmured. "Money trouble in the house. I'm so worried about Michael." I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. Rumors do their own work. And Act 3, the charity meeting at church. She loved to play the perfect wife there, always dressed to impress, donating just enough to look generous. But when the treasurer announced a shortfall in pledges, I tilted my head and said, "Oh, perhaps that explains why some of our mail keeps mentioning overdue balances." I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I simply let the words fall like drops of ink into clear water, watching the ripples spread. She was furious, of course. I could feel her glare burning holes into my back as we left. But what could she do? To lash out at me in public would only prove me right. So she smiled, tight and brittle, while her perfect image began to crack. And Michael, my son, he had started to notice. The way she brushed off questions, the way she changed subjects, the way she tightened her grip on his arm, as though control was slipping. It was, because the performance was no longer hers. It was mine, and I played it beautifully. She thought I was fading into the background, but the truth was simple. I was stepping back into the spotlight, and the performance had only just begun. It was a Thursday evening when the mask finally slipped. The table was set, the smell of rosemary chicken drifting through the house. Michael sat across from me, tired from work, and she, always immaculate, sat at his side, her smile stretched thin as glass. We ate in silence for a while, the kind of silence that hums with electricity. And then it happened. She slammed her fork down, the metal clattering against the plate. Enough, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through bone. Her eyes were fixed on me, blazing with fury. I am sick of your little games, your whispers, your meddling. You sit here like some queen, judging me, but this is my house now. Mine. Michael froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. The air was heavy, the kind of heavy that makes hearts race. I looked at her, calmly, and folded my napkin in my lap. I only ask questions, I said softly. Isn't it better to ask than to wonder? She laughed bitterly, but the sound cracked in the middle. Don't play innocent. You've been poisoning people against me. The neighbors, the church, even Michael. Her voice rose higher, shriller, as Michael's gaze shifted uneasily between us. You think you're so clever, don't you? She hissed, acting like some fragile old woman. But you're not fragile, you're manipulative. Always listening, always watching, always interfering. I kept my voice low, almost tender. You sound frightened, dear. The words landed like stones. Her face flushed red, her breath came quick, and in that moment, everyone at the table could see it, the cracks splitting wide open. Michael set his fork down. Frightened of what? He asked slowly, his eyes narrowing on her. She opened her mouth, closed it again, her hands twisted in her lap, and then, in her panic, she said the very words that undid her, frightened of losing everything. The room fell silent. Michael stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. And I simply sipped my water, letting the words echo. Finally, I set the glass down and said, almost kindly, sometimes the truth has a way of spilling out, even when we try to hide it. Her chair scraped back. Her voice cracked into a scream. You won't ruin me. Do you hear me? You won't. And she stormed from the room, her heels pounding up the stairs. Michael sat in silence, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the empty doorway she had left behind. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because the performance was over, and she had written her own ending. That night, she thought she had confronted me, but in truth, she had only exposed herself. The next morning, I brewed coffee as though nothing had happened. The house was quiet, too quiet. Michael's footsteps were heavy in the hallway. Hers were clipped and uneven, like someone pacing a prison cell. By noon, I asked them both to sit at the dining table, the same table where just last night she had shattered her mask. Only this time, it was I who placed something in the center, a folder, thick, worn at the edges. Michael looked at it curiously, but she stiffened at once. What's this supposed to be? She demanded. I folded my hands, my voice calm. The truth, I said. The kind that isn't whispered, but written, sealed, and witnessed. Slowly, I opened the folder. Inside lay papers older than her marriage, older than her schemes, but still sharp enough to cut through her pride. Michael leaned forward, frowning. Is that? Yes, I said gently. The deed to this house, and the will your father and I drafted before he passed. Her face went white. I could almost hear the air catch in her throat. You're lying, she stammered. Michael, she's lying. This is just another one of her tricks. I slid the top page toward him. Read it, I whispered, and tell me if ink lies. His eyes moved across the words, his brow tightening with every line. When he finally looked up, there was no mistaking the truth that weighed on him. It's all in her name, he said quietly. The house, the land, even the savings account. Her chair screeched as she pushed back violently. No, this can't be. You said it was ours, Michael. You promised me it was ours. But Michael didn't answer. His gaze was locked on me now, his face pale, his voice trembling. Why didn't you ever tell us? I gave him a sad, tired smile. Because, my son, I wanted you to build your own strength, not depend on mine. But when someone tries to erase me, they leave me no choice but to remind them who holds the pen. She lunged for the folder, her fingers clawing at the papers. But Michael stopped her hand midair. Don't, he said firmly. The silence that followed was thick as stone. Her chest heaved, her eyes darted, but there was no escape. I gathered the papers, slicked them back into the folder, and rose to my feet. "From this day forward," I said softly, "understand this, I am not a guest here. I am the foundation, and foundations cannot be erased." She had tried to push me out of my own home, but now she finally saw the home had never been hers to claim. After that day at the dining table, her kingdom began to crumble, not with the crash of thunder, but with the slow, deliberate silence of doors closing, one by one. She had always carried herself like a queen in my home, ordering, demanding, declaring what was hers. But now, every step she took echoed hollow. The walls no longer answered her. The air no longer bent to her. The first sign was Michael. He stopped defending her, stopped echoing her words as if they were gospel. When she complained about the grocery bills, he only muttered, "We'll manage." When she snapped that I was getting in the way again, he sighed and walked out of the room. To her, silence was betrayal, and Michael's silence was louder than any fight. Then came the neighbors. She had loved to parade herself at backyard barbecues, boasting about the future renovations she planned for her house. But whispers travel faster than smoke, and soon they all knew. The deed was not in her name, nor in Michael's. It was mine. At the next gathering, no one asked her about her plans. They asked me, "Will you be redoing the porch, Linda? The roses are blooming again. Are you tending them yourself?" Her smile strained. Her wine glass shook, but she said nothing, because in that moment she knew her crown had slipped. Inside the house, her desperation grew claws. One night she cornered Michael in the kitchen. I heard her voice through the thin walls. "She's manipulating you. Can't you see? She's trying to take everything away from us." Michael's reply was low, but firm. "She doesn't need to take anything, Rebecca. It was never yours to begin with." The sound of glass shattering followed. Her rage always broke something. Dishes, vases, trust. But nothing she broke could put cracks in me anymore. The final blow came from her own pride. She had written letters, venomous, desperate letters, to her parents, her friends, even her church, all warning them of the old woman poisoning her marriage. But when they came to see for themselves, when they stood in the house I had built with my own hands, they saw the truth in the photographs on the walls, the warmth of my presence in every corner, and in her words, they saw only bitterness. Her kingdom, once built on my silence, was reduced to rubble by my truth. Brick by brick, crown by crown, she stood more alone than she had ever been. She thought she had erased me, but it was her reflection that faded first, until even her own shadow seemed. It is a strange thing to watch someone become a stranger in the very space they once claimed as their throne. Yet that is exactly what happened to her. The dining table, where she once demanded her seat at the head, now felt too large, too cold for her voice. She sat smaller, quieter, as though afraid every word would be weighed and found wanting. Michael, once her shield, now looked past her. He spoke to me, asked me about the bills, the garden, the repairs. She tried to interrupt. "Michael, we need to talk about." But his reply cut sharper than a knife. Later never came. At night, I heard her pacing in the guest room. Yes, the guest room. She had insisted on redecorating it years ago, turning it into her little project. Now it had become her corner, her cage. Her perfume clung to the curtains, but it couldn't mask the stench of defeat. I passed her in the hallway one morning, her hair uncombed, her eyes wild with sleeplessness. She muttered under her breath, "This is still my house. This is still mine." But the walls didn't echo back anymore. They answered only to me. Outside these walls, the exile spread wider. Her friends stopped calling. Neighbors no longer waved. At the church, whispers followed her like shadows. They had heard the story, seen the cracks, understood the truth. No kingdom survives when the foundation rejects its ruler. One Sunday, she reached for Michael's hand during service. He didn't take it. Instead, he folded his hands in prayer, his eyes fixed forward, leaving hers to tremble in the empty space. I watched her from across the pew, and I felt no pity, only clarity. For years, she had tried to exile me from my own life, pushing me into corners, silencing my voice, erasing my name from conversations. Now, she lived that exile herself, not because I struck her down, but because she had built her world on sand. And the tide had come. She drifted around the house like a ghost, avoiding mirrors, avoiding me. Every time our eyes met, hers darted away, as though she feared I might remind her again. And, again, that power built on lies has no weight at all. She had tried to make me invisible. Now, she was the one no one could see. An exile, in the very home she once claimed as her kingdom. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day when the sky itself feels heavy, when every drop against the window sounds like a ticking clock. She was standing by the kitchen sink, her hands gripping the counter, her eyes hollow. Michael sat at the table, his face drawn, his voice weary. "Rebecca," he said softly, "this can't go on. We can't live like this anymore." Her head snapped toward him. "So that's it? You're choosing her over me?" I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The papers had already spoken. The silence of the neighbors had already spoken. The distance between her and Michael had already spoken. Michael's hands tightened around his coffee mug. "I'm choosing peace, and right now, peace doesn't exist with you in this house." The words struck her harder than any shout could. She staggered back, her breath ragged. "You can't do this to me. This is my home too." I rose from my chair, placing a single envelope on the table. It was thick, sealed, marked with her name. Her eyes locked onto it, like prey cornered by a hunter. "What's that?" she demanded. "Your choice," I said quietly. "Inside are two paths. The first, a check with enough to start over somewhere else, clean, dignified. No one needs to know how this ended." Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. She tore it open, saw the check, her eyes widening. "And the second," she whispered. I met her gaze without flinching. "The second path is staying. But understand this, you will stay as a guest. No authority, no voice above mine. Every step, every word will remind you that this is not your throne. It never was." The silence that followed stretched long, thick as the storm outside. She looked at Michael, hoping for rescue. But he only lowered his eyes. He had already chosen his peace. Her breath came in shallow bursts. The woman who once strutted through this house, like a queen, now looked smaller than the shadow she cast. Finally, she gathered the envelope, stuffed it into her purse, and whispered, "You'll regret this." I shook my head slowly. "No, Rebecca. I already regret the years I let you steal from me. This is just balance returning." She left that night, her suitcase dragging across the porch I had built with my own hands. The same porch where she once told me I didn't belong. But now, it was her footsteps echoing into the dark. In the end, she had her choice: leave with dignity or live in exile. Either way, the house stood with me, because the foundation was mine, and some things can never be erased. I sit here tonight, with the rain still tapping against the windows. The house feels different now, not because its walls have changed, but because I have. For years, I thought survival meant silence. I thought endurance was the same as strength. So I let myself be pushed into corners, erased from conversations, treated like a burden in the home I had built with my own two hands. But silence, I've learned, does not protect you. It only teaches others to believe you can be erased. The day Rebecca walked out with her suitcase, I did not feel joy, not triumph, not even relief. What I felt was balance, like a storm that had finally passed, leaving behind a house still standing, roots still deep in the ground. Michael comes by more often now. He sits with me on the porch, his eyes heavy with regret. He doesn't say much, but sometimes silence speaks louder than words. I see the boy I raised in him again. And maybe, just maybe, there is hope for healing. Do I forgive her? That is the question I ask myself. Forgiveness is heavy, and it cannot be rushed. But I know this. I will never again surrender my place in this world. Not to her, not to anyone. When I walk through this house now, I see the truth in every corner. The photographs on the walls, the porch built board by board, the kitchen that still carries the scent of my cooking. They all tell the same story. A story of a woman who refused to vanish. Rebecca tried to erase me, but in the end, she erased herself. And I remain. So tell me, when blood turns its back on you, when family becomes the hand that tries to erase your very existence, what would you do? Would you forgive? Or would you, like me, choose to remind them that some foundations cannot be broken?